another introduction. And
Okay. Thanks, Susan. And if you'll just make sure and listen in to make sure that we've got the PowerPoint going at the appropriate time, that'll be great.
absolutely.
Yeah,
And
thank you.
I do have that up. So if there's any technical
Oh,
difficulties, I will help out. So I'll just listen for
okay.
my name.
Can I
Okay.
ask a question? So when I share my screen, will I still be able to see everybody else?
It depends on your device, but why don't we go ahead and I'll stay live here with you.
Okay.
Sarah, why don't you go ahead and do yours, and I'll talk you through that, and hopefully we'll be able to kind of troubleshoot that and get you up and running.
All right. Well, welcome again, everyone, to the second session of our discussion on the book Whitewalling. Our presenter today is Nancy Losh, as you recall. Nancy is an artist and an art educator. She worked for many years for Herman Miller here in Holland, and then wound up her career as an art professor at the College for Creative Studies in Detroit. So I will turn things over to Nancy at this point. And please do unmute yourselves. It's fine. We're going to have a very open discussion here today.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I am going to, first of all, thank you for joining. I'm going to share my screen because I prepared a PowerPoint, and I have samples of the images that were in the book. And it's hard to make some judgment, as it were, without knowing what the images were and how they relate to one another. So, but I also have some little stories I want to share in the beginning too. So I'm going to share my screen and see what happens. Whitewalling 2. And whoops, maybe, I guess you can't see it yet, right?
Not yet. Do you want me to talk you through it? And also just give you the option, if you'd like for me to share it, all you need to do is say next slide, and I will progress it. So you will be able to fully have your Zoom screen up.
Oh, okay. So if I want to share my desktop.
You'll actually want to share the icon that just has the PowerPoint in it. So go to share screen.
Yeah.
Find the icon that only has your PowerPoint in it. And when you press share screen, which is in the lower right-hand corner, then we should be able to see that PowerPoint.
And that PowerPoint's not coming up. It's coming up with desktop and a warning sign. So.
Okay. Would you be okay if I shared mine?
Let's go your way. Yeah.
Okay. So what I'm going to do a little advanced version. I'm going to share a portion of my screen, and I'm talking through this because normally I prepare this prior to having a class. But I'm going to share a portion of my screen, and I'll get that set up here real quickly.
Oh, good. That works. Yeah.
And it's just an advanced way so I can still do some things in the background. So I'm going to test advancing. Okay, so all you need to do, Nancy, is just say next slide or back up, just communicate, and I'll be here, okay?
Okay, all right. Well, Whitewalling Act 2, the Nigger Drawings, Artist Space, next slide, in 1979. Next slide. Whoops, back up one more. I just wanted to give you a feeling for where it is located in New York City, and how, what a sort of inconspicuous place it is. So Artist Space, by the way, is a alternative gallery. I liken it a little bit to the Holland Area Arts Council because it's supported by funds, public funds, New York State funds, and New York State Arts Council funds, and National Endowment for the Arts funds. It's not a private gallery, but their mission is to display the works of people who are not in the mainstream. So they often work with newcomers to the area and very alternative art, which is what was happening during this time period in 1979. So go to the next slide, please. Whoops, back up one. There you go. So in 1979, Jimmy Carter was the president. It wasn't a particularly difficult time, and it wasn't extremely tumultuous in terms of, and correct me if I'm wrong, in terms of multicultural issues, international issues in the Middle East was a huge problem. But before I begin, I just wanted to sort of give you a little context for when the article was written. It's difficult to view the article, again, which happened the story happened in 1979 through the lens of 2021, because so much has transpired over the time period, and yet so much, so much has not changed. So, it's still the same. So but I would like to share not only that, but two personal stories related to two of the people in the article. So can you go to the next slide? Lucy Lippard, this is Lucy today. Lucy is a writer, curator, art critic, and member of the Emergency Coalition. And if you recall, the Emergency Coalition stepped in to protest what was going on at the gallery at the time. So, but Lucy was a young woman in 1979, just starting out in New York, and she was a curator at that time. But fast forward to about maybe 3 years ago, she was invited out to speak to us at College for Creative Studies in Detroit. And while she was there, she took a side trip to the University of Michigan, which is where my daughter is the art librarian for Penny Stamp's art gallery or art studio at the university. In the end, she wound up working with my daughter, who has been out to Santa Fe to meet with her. My daughter will be archiving all of her collections. So it's a little personal connection on that one. So next slide, please. And then there's Vito Escanzi. Vito, a performance provocateur for sure, and architect, and member of the opposition to the protest in this article. Again, this was Vito in 2017. I'm sorry to say he passed away, but he passed away shortly after. He also was invited to the College for Creative Studies, and he joined us at graduation to be given an honorary PhD during the ceremonies. And his work during this early period and throughout his life was extremely provocative. And back in that time, 1979, I was recently married and moved to Zealand. But prior to that, I was an undergrad at Cardinal Stritch College, a Catholic university in Milwaukee. And I had to study Vito's work for a while. And at that time, I was a young Catholic girl, and I was just horrified by his work. I have to be honest. What he did was, I just felt was sort of a big laugh on the art world. You'll see one of his pieces soon. In fact, it's one that I could show, actually, some of the things he did in the galleries. But when he was invited out to CCS, we at our graduation, sadly, they've had to put a stop to it now because of the COVID, but the students, we graduate at the Opera House in downtown Detroit, and it's absolutely stunning. And they make a big deal out of robing us and the ceremony and all the regalia. It's just stunning. And so after we were robed, he was there, and I got robed, and I sat down next to this gentleman that I had no idea who he was. And we just had the best conversation. He was such a lovely young old man, young, old, whatever. We just had the best conversation. I had no idea until we got onto stage, and the president introduced Vito, and this guy stood up, and this was Vito today. And I had written I was vehemently opposed to his work during that time period. I have to say, time has changed. I support what his efforts. He was really pushing the envelope, and I think that's what some of this is all about, being provocative, right or wrong. I can't tell you whether we'll have to make that decision. So can you go to the next slide, please? So this is one of his pieces. It's called Applications, Performance, Bodies, Lipstick, and Transference. And this was at the Wabash Transit Gallery in Chicago Art Institute in 1970. And that was the time that I was studying his work. So that's what the best I can show you of some of the things he did in the past. So, but that sort of sets the stage for who's talking and whose opinion and where they're coming from. So, okay, can you change slides, please? Thank you. So I also wanted to give a definition of the word nigger. You know, we often think that it has changed over time and it's sort of evolved, but in truth, it really hasn't. It's always been offensive. It's used as an insulting and contemptuous term for a Black person. And two, it's offensive, used as insulting and contemptuous term for members of any dark-skinned race. And three, it's now it is often offensive members of members of a class or group of people who are systemically subjected to discrimination and unfair treatment. In the next article, the term nigger gallery is used, implying that works that didn't quite meet the highest standard to be displayed were often displayed in the gallery in the back, and they called it the nigger gallery. So it has it really has awful connotations in its history and its use. So next slide, please. So this is the invitation. The show that we're talking about is called The Nigger Drawings. It was, as I said, in 1979 at the at Art Space in Soho, actually, in New York. But this is a close-up of Donald's work, and this is basically what he had titled Art Space. So you'll see another image in a few minutes. So next slide, please. So this is the news release that went out in 1979, and the Artist Space will, it reads, the Artist Space will present the work of 4 artists in one person exhibitions for the month of February, opening on February 17th and closing on March 10th. So Dennis Adams, his work is titled Patty Hearst. It's a second reading, extended room in 207. So each one of these individuals, their work wasn't intermingled. It was shown individually in different locations in the gallery. Dennis, by the way, went on to do, all the way up until a few years ago, focused his work on Patricia Hearst. And y'all know what happened to Patty Hearst during that time period. So. And James Carabert, I believe that's, Casabert, it's hard to read. Life Story #1, I'll show you, I have samples of these. And Donald, of course, the nigger drawings. And Barbara Levy, Barbara was a photographer, and her black and white works were also shown. This goes on to give us a little bit of a description, but let's go on to the next slide, please. So this is Dennis Adams' work. It's essentially black and white photographs, 191 inches by 27 inches in a constructed room at Art Space in New York. So he not only showed the images, they were extremely large, but he built structures around them. But again, they were black and white. So the next slide, please. James Casabert's work, Life Story Part 1. And interestingly enough, James went on to do this to follow this same theme throughout his life of work as well. This was his work in 1978 that was shown in the gallery. Gelatin silver, which is a type of photography, so he photographed it, 20 by 24 inches. So he went on to display these black and white images of very, very austere, simple housing in a neighborhood. So next slide, please. And this is Donald's drawing. This is only one. There were 7 5 by 7 triptychs. They're called. They were multiples. They all sort of continued a scene, but they were on 7 separate canvases, very large, 5 feet by 7 feet. But it's a very simple black and white landscape, as it were. Next screen, please. And this is Barbara Levy's work. Again, it's offset printed, black and white, 8 by 14 centimeters. I honestly don't know what that relates to, but not that large. So, but as you can see, it's a Polaroid. Barbara as well continued to work in the same sort of, there were more landscapes as well as these sort of obscure interior works that are sort of ethereal, kind of hard to get a handle on what it is there is actually happening in them. And she went on to do that for many years as well. So of the 4 artists, 3 of them from 1979 until today have had active art lives, as it were. So next slide, please. So the primary issue with the show is why, and I'm going to ask the question, do you think the gallery chose the name Nigger Drawings? Why did they choose Donald's work to title the show when they had 4 black and white images of 4, total of 4 artists, all working in black and white? Why do you think they made that decision? Number 2, was Donald, being a white man, was he justified in titling his work Nigger Drawing? I'll talk a little bit about why he did that in a minute. And do you think the gallery purposely ignored the Black art community when sending out the invitations to avoid controversy, as Janet Henry suggested? So her suggestion in her letter to the gallery was that they ignored sending their invitations to the Black community so that the Black community would maybe not know what happened or not pay attention. So, and the Emergency Coalition stepped in. Members included Lucy Lippard, feminist critic and curator, and Faith Ringgold, who you may be familiar with, another Black artist and founding member of the group. All members of the group were part of the established alternative art scene. All members of the coalition were part of the established alternative art scene. These 4 individuals that were showing were not quite accepted yet. So and that's why they were shown at Art Space. Art Space continues to live, by the way. It's still an active art scene in Milwaukee, or art gallery in New York. So were they correct in stepping in? So let's go back to number 1. Why do you think they chose the name Nigger Drawing? Was it to be controversial, or for what other reason might they have chosen the name Nigger Drawings to title the show? Does anybody have any thoughts on that?
Remember that you're muted.
Sue, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just curious because the only thing I can think of is because everything is black and white, in the contrast of
Yeah.
there's nothing done in color. But I don't know. I mean, I just think in today's world, it seems totally inappropriate. And you're not showing any works of Black people or pictures of Black people or any, it just doesn't seem to fit at all. But the only thing I could think of is just because everything is black and white. That might be one curious reason. I'm not sure.
Oh, Nancy, could you describe a bit more what that technique was that he used with the charcoal
Yeah, he would.
applied to the drawings?
It was extremely large, and that's probably the key to it. It was an extremely large 7 canvases, and he was working with charcoal, which is literally a stick of charcoal in black. And when you do that, as having taught it over the years, it's the kind of thing that you want to wear the worst outfit you have ever had, if anything, because it just literally does cover you. And if you're working on a surface that is that large, you can't help but have chalk, the black chalk dropping on your arms and your hands, and literally it's all over the room. It's an extremely messy medium. So in the end, his belief was that, and he was naive. He just came out of California and made it to. Can you hear the wildlife out here? Can you hear it
Oh.
rain? I'm sorry. He had just come to New York, to the New York art scene, and was right out of grad school. And again, 1979, the alternative art movement was really coming on strong. So I think he was very naive in thinking that this wasn't going to be a problem to name his work that, because he felt when he was done, he looked like a nigger because he was so black from all of the charcoal that he had all over him. I don't know, maybe a little maturity might have tempered his feelings. But artists at that time period, I think, were trying to be provocative. They were trying to push the envelope. As I said, Vito would literally stand in a gallery and let bugs eat him at that time. He also would do other things that we wouldn't even talk about in the gallery as people walked by. So they were trying to take art to a level that forced the viewer into responding in maybe more beyond "isn't this lovely" or "beautiful." They were trying to draw the viewer in and get a response at that time, during that time period. So
I would think that Donald was not naive. I think he was deliberately provocative.
yeah, I think you're.
I mean, there are other ways to describe that work.
Mm-hmm.
And then was the gallery calling the whole show?
Yes. So of all 4 of them were black and white images, 2 in photography. I'm forgetting now what the third one. Maybe all 3 in photography, and then his in charcoal. They could have named it any one of the others, or come up with another name.
So did the other artists, you think, have any idea that they were going to name the whole show this?
To my knowledge, no. Mm-mm. No.
There's-
Go ahead.
There's some discussion on page 77 related to the naming and the use of the terminology. And it discusses in one of these books, the term in terms of the punk scene, a milieu marked by an amoral drive to destruction, transgression, and rejection of trappings of bourgeois culture, especially its pieties around race, gender, race, and sexuality. To change the world meant to redefine language, to neutralize it, to disarm it by embracing its ugliest aspects. And it says in statements that Donald made during the course of the fiasco, it's clear that he saw himself as part of this movement. In a March 17 communication, he referred to Patti Smith's recent song, Rock and Roll Nigger, and declared that, like Smith's album, his title was meant to contribute to the, quote, de-racialization of the word. And then it says that Weiner herself would pick up on this argument, saying that at this point, nigger is a broadly used adjective that no longer simply refers to Blacks in a pejorative context. Artists refer to the project's gallery as at the Whitney as the nigger gallery because it isn't in the big time upstairs, which is what you just mentioned earlier,
Yes.
that
Mhm.
people are neutralizing languages. These words don't have quite the power they used to have, and that seems like a healthy thing. I had such a hard time when I read that. I was like, what?
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, okay, you hear something or you see something over and over again and you become desensitized. Well, that's not what happens with
Right.
this.
Right.
I think every time I hear the word used, I feel like I'm scraping my fingers down the blackboard. It just is, I read that and I went, well, that's, quite a stretch, I thought.
Yeah, I mean, maybe Weiner was naive because it certainly didn't neutralize anything, and it never is going to, in my opinion.
No.
Well, and
And again, it was a white person saying that too. I mean,
Exactly.
Right. Yeah.
they're not the subject of that word.
It's
They're
a
not
perfect
subjected
exa-
to it.
it's a perfect example of white privilege.
Yeah.
And even the fact he used just the name Donald, it just displays such an arrogance, it's like Madonna or it's like I'll just go by Donald. Yeah.
Either that or he was
But
trying
that
to
white
hide.
privilege to think that's okay and he can define words and use them that way, it's just, but it still happens today too. People don't recognize that privilege that white people have to even think that way.
yeah, that's why I think he was naive in thinking that he was going to change the world by using it, thinking that, his simple use of the word to title his work was going to be a brave, bold move to allow that word to become normalized. And again, as we've seen over the years, many people have tried and clearly have failed. As the show went on, there was so much controversy, but he wouldn't back down throughout the whole thing. And neither would the gallery until the end. They did apologize.
Yeah, I wonder if even before that, I mean, her sentence about artists refer to the projects gallery at the Whitney with
Yes.
that same word because it quote ain't the big time upstairs. I mean, that's pretty horrifying. And I'm surprised that, there hadn't been a pushback about that.
Right, but I wonder if that was amongst their own sort of clique or group of people. I don't know that was broadcast, so it was sort of that.
Well, it might depend on whether they were Black artists or white artists.
Correct. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. So
the monetary support for this particular exhibition or this was majority white, and that's the basis of opening up by using the term nigger.
was the support in terms of what, financial or attendance or participation?
Well, it might draw in the participation of those who don't, if it's monetarily supported by the whites who are more well off or whatever.
Interestingly enough, that's a secondary issue that can we go to the next slide? Maybe we'll come back to this one. It was publicly funded by the National Endowment for the Arts and also by the New York State Council for the Arts. Both are public money, and I've seen that argument for many, many years. In fact, there was looking at Vito Ascanzi in one of the articles that press releases, or not necessarily a press release, but a little article that announced his death in 2017 said the National Endowment for the Arts can rest easy because he has now died. because his work was so provocative, and yet did they have the right to to um, to do what they did, given that it was public funds. But can we go back a slide now? And I want to come back to that because I think I want to tackle some of these other issues and then come back to that issue of public funding and around that. But because the woman that started the whole controversy, Janet, I can't think of her last name now. She wrote the letter to the art. She went to see the show and was just horrified. And honestly, it really never clearly stated that the gallery ignored the Black community, but she felt that she did not get an invitation, and yet she should have, because she was part of the art community at that time and would have gotten invitations under any what she thought normal circumstances. So she felt that the gallery purposely named it that and then ignored her community. And so when she saw the show, she was outraged. But I thought it was interesting because she tried, as they described, she really held her anger as she was writing her letter, because she didn't want to make false assumptions, as it were, that this was happening. But that is what began the entire controversy, and then it obviously went way beyond a simple conversation. Was in the New York Times. There was the coalition was formed to support her feelings. But at any rate, do you think they did? Did you find in your readings that they had actually ignored the Black community? I didn't myself.
It'd be hard to know unless you know who was invited, but it seems, I can see why they might want to avoid it because of the title. And it certainly would not have been, I don't think the Black community would have found it very appealing. Certainly would have been controversial.
Right.
It's all just really unfortunate because this should have been a space that was available to Black artists and encouraging and supporting them in so many ways. And because it was an alternative space.
Yes.
And they desperately needed those, especially in 1979, when they were probably not, or they were ignored largely in more mainline institutions. So, it was really unfortunate on a lot of levels.
Right. Interestingly enough, Janet Henry was who wrote the first letter. And she's a Black artist. The Emergency Coalition stepped in, and members included Lucy, as I said, and Faith Ringgold. But all the members of the group were part of the established alternative art scene, which, there already was alternative art being accepted, but this was not. So they came to the aid of Janet Henry. Not only did they support her, but they actually tried to protest. They did protest, but they tried to put on some workshops. And the day they were going to put on the workshop, the gallery, just what a coincidence, they were closed for the day. So they were unable then to even put on their workshop dealing with the issue. So I also, in the end, Lucy Lippard apologized for her role in this, which I thought was interesting, but she did it, I think, because she went on to do some work of her own. And it's interesting what draws people to do things, I think. But the Emergency Coalition has lived on over the years in New York to sort of right the wrongs. But I'm not sure what page that's on where she's actually quoted.
Is the Emergency Coalition just to be a regulating system, or what is their role, Nancy? I didn't quite understand that.
I think their mission is to oversee or speak up on behalf of artists that they feel are not being treated well or appropriately. They actually have a chairman of the group, Faith Ringgold, who has over the years been she's a founding member, and I think she was a chair at the time. But their mission really is supportive of artists that feel they've been sort of wronged, as it were, and it does continue. So
Again, it seems so odd that an alternative space like this would have been so concerned about the idea of that teach-in that they purposely closed that day because that's when they had it scheduled.
Right.
And now, on the other hand, the Emergency Coalition hadn't really given much information about what they intended to do that day. But you'd think they could have resolved that somehow. I mean, the Whitney at least did have an open forum, as we talked about in the previous chapter.
Exactly.
Again, for an alternative space to kind of close off the conversation seems so questionable and sad.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like the art space did anything positive, really. I mean, they had the show, it was white artists, they named it what I would consider an offensive name. They didn't consult with any Black artists ahead of time, or even during it, apparently, until the Emergency Coalition stepped in. They closed the workshop. I mean, it just seems like every step they took was more in your face.
Right. But again, I have to think back to 1979 because that's what was happening. I think artists were really emboldened at that time, thinking that, they could do anything they wanted to push the envelope to make the audience respond in some provocative sort of way, and they could call it art. It's even to this day. And I want just a quick story again about CCS, where I was teaching, and Cardinal Street, CCS is known for its automobile design and industry, but we also had a fine arts department. And one afternoon, there's a display area outside of my office where any department could just randomly bring a group and present their work. And the fine arts department one evening said, "Oh, come and see what our kids are doing." And so I was just sitting in my office, and I heard this snapping noise out in the hallway, and I thought, this is fine arts department, by the way. And there were, so I went out, and I could hear people buzzing, and there were two young men dressed in basically loincloths and black high heels, and one was whipping the other one and calling it art. So the provocative push the envelope world continues today in the alternative art scene. Sometimes it's hard to gather up and not say anything, but it's a controversial world to be in. So sorry to take that off, but so do you think the coalition was correct in stepping in?
Well, they were just exerting their voice. I think if we all have a voice, then they can have a voice too, right? I don't know. It just the goal gets tricky.
Mm-hmm.
I think when they're talking about taking funding away, though, that was kind of um, maybe a little overreach.
All right, let's go to the next slide because that's the underlying issue then. If we accept the fact that it's called nigger drawings, should public funds be used to support the gallery and the show, the National Endowment for the Arts? And the National Endowment for the Arts continues to support artist space every year. And the New York Arts Council, they get their funding also from federal funds, and then they distribute it amongst worthy applicants, as it were. And so all in all, it's public funding. In the article in the New York Times, Kitty Carlisle, do you remember Kitty Carlisle, any of you?
Yes.
That Kitty Carlisle, she was on Tell the Truth, I think. She was on that television show. At that time, she was the chairman of the NYSCA, and she said the council firmly upholds its enabling legislation stating that its policy should be directed towards encouraging and assisting rather than in any way limiting the freedom of expression that is essential to the well-being of the arts. So basically she supported, in the end, she had hoped that the gallery would use better judgment going forward, but she supported doing it in sort of the First Amendment belief, I guess. So what are your thoughts on public funding and sort of doing whatever in the name of art?
Well, there's always that question, what is art? And I think really, we weren't complaining about what they were showing. It was just the titling. But I think,
Correct. Mm-hmm.
so, it's difficult. I mean, we still have that today. And I mean, you can go with a different person to an art museum and they're looking at a piece and they'll say, my kindergartner could have done that. I can't understand why it's hanging here. And so, I mean, whatever, everybody has a different appreciation. So I think what people present, and it's all very different. And you just, but I think the language here was what was more, and if it even had something to do with Black people, or showing a person treated as a nigger, or whatever, it just didn't seem to fit what they were showing. So I think that was what the problem was here more than anything else. It's just language. And it might have worked if it worked because it was something that was being presented, but it didn't seem like it worked with any of the art that was being represented that day, or that period of time.
Isn't it kind of like separation of church and state? And if you're schools, public schools, there's going to be some control. If you're going to take public funds, then you got to pay the price, I guess. But that's just a thought I had. I mean, if you do take public funds, then you're subjected to criticism and a certain amount of control. I just went back in 79. I'm trying to think back to 79, and things were quite different. That word was used among white people.
Mm-hmm.
It's not acceptable, but it was used in a pejorative way.
Yes.
And I think that has a lot, and I'm not sure on this, but why the Black community adopted it as their own. They say that word to each other in the Black community.
They do.
In their music, they adopted it. It's like the Q word in LGBTQ. That was the pejorative at one time. So the community, the LGBT, they adopted it as their own. If you're going to call us that in a pejorative way, we're going to make it ours and use it the way we want. And I kind of feel that way. It's hard to remember back to 79, but boy, I don't think things were that far ahead of the civil rights and all of that, where it's only passed in late 60s. I mean, my husband and I couldn't legally be married in 1967, 68. So, I mean,
Exactly. Yeah.
yeah.
I think it was in 1980 something that Jesse Jackson introduced the term black to the as a description of the community or African American, to take it away from those pejorative titles that had been used, and it was accepted. And since that time, in the 80s, we've used African American, and really, I felt at that time that really emphasized the negative connotation of the term. But I think you're right. Back in '79, it was a different time. But you know, were we aware of systemic racism in 1979? Do you think this was an example of systemic racism? It was built into the gallery. The people that were running it didn't seem to take second thought of it.
In some of the classes that we've been taking, studying the question of race, it seems to be felt that systemic racism has been either in the forefront or under the surface in our society all along.
Mhm.
So raising its head at some times, maybe in 1979 it wasn't so obvious, but it's been there. And that one of the themes that we've seen is that a privileged white person who says that they have not a racist bone in their body doesn't understand what is underlying our society.
Yeah, it's been 400 years or more. You know, I grew up in a totally segregated community or, you know, milieu in the South. And it was right in your face all the time, you know, water fountains, department stores, schools, buses, everything, every single thing was segregated. And for the most part, white people just, well, that's the way it is, you know. So, you know, I think the cluelessness has lasted for a long time, and maybe white people are becoming more aware now, and they weren't in '79. But you know, the use of that word is still used as an insult, as hate speech, you know, by white people. So,
Remember the Capitol Police on January 6th, the Black Capitol Police were exposed to that.
right?
I mean, so it is used in a nasty way. It's come to the surface, I think, more and more, but it's when you have members of Congress putting out letters, I believe it was yesterday, the day before, talking about the Anglo-Saxon values,
Yes.
basically, and some of the words in that letter were right out of the KKK workbook.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's in the open now, but it's been going on since what, 1619. I mean, this is not new.
So I think, you know, you talk about freedom of speech, which I support, but then there's also hate speech. And, you know, where do you cross that line? And how far can you go with something being accepted if it's hate speech towards somebody else?
I was just listening to Terry Gross at noon today, and there was an author on speaking about her. She's a biracial woman. Her father was black, her mother was white. He was from Africa, she was from Britain. And when she was 17, she was the only white girl in this high school. And it was her birthday, and her best friend had made a big poster on her locker saying all kinds of wonderful things, and friends had written right things. And then someone came along when she went to class and wrote nigger all over it in big letters. And she talked about how even 40 years later, how that day will never leave her imprint because of just such a derogatory thing and such a mean, nasty thing to do, to say. So I think people still get hurt by it. And here's someone, well, and she was born in the late 60s, so 79, she might have been about 17. So anyway, so she was just talking about her own personal story of that and the effect on her and just how it took her day from being a wonderful, glorious birthday to being so, so negative, so hurtful.
I used to be part of a small women's group in East Lansing called the Panel of American Women. And we had various religions and various ethnicities. And we spoke to churches or schools or whoever would invite us. And the Black woman who was married to a person high in the federal administration said, the thing is, I'm just always braced. I never know where the next thing's coming from. You know, I can be walking down the sidewalk or driving in my car and somebody yells from the sidewalk that particular word. And she said, it's exhausting. It's exhausting.
Yeah, this woman's father was a Surgeon General for the United States. That was his status. So he was a very well respected person, but she still had a lot of difficulty. People always ask her what she was because she wasn't Black or she wasn't white, and
Yeah.
just it was really a kind of a disturbing conversation today, listening to her of what she's experienced, and whether she was with her white mother or with her Black father, how she was treated.
Mhm.
Well, they have the literature shows that the stress on Black people living with that all their lives, how it does affect their health to such a degree, because they're always on guard. I'm
Mhm.
sure I've shared with this group, my husband is Black, and he's 83 years old and he's always on guard, always has been. We've never gone in a restaurant where his back will be to the door. I do all the driving now, but I've been with him when he's been pulled over for no reason. I mean, this happens. And I think I might have mentioned this in this group when we first moved here several years ago, and we were in Holland, and I went in the store and he was in the car and the police asked him what he was doing. I think I mentioned this, maybe not to this group, but this is now. I mean, this isn't ages ago, but it's something he lives with. And he was a Detroit cop. I mean, he knows the game and he knows, but he also grew up in Virginia and he knows, was, worked on his grandfather, whose parents had been slaves on a tobacco farm as a kid in the summer. And he remembers very clearly all the different signs and what store you could go in and was safe and not safe. I mean, he was 7, 8 years old and he knew the rules. So this is today, and it's gotten actually worse today with what's been happening in the last 4 years, 5 years. It's gotten much worse, but then I have to also try to stay positive. Well, now it's out in the open. It's out in the open. People have to make a choice who they want to be. And I think we're finding out. Scary, but we're finding out.
Well, it seems like it's evolving back again. Like what didn't happen that these people, what are they forgetting? What are they not seeing? But getting back to this public funding issue, should the gallery accept public funds if they're going to do something like this? That's so blatant. I'm hoping they have learned their lesson. I haven't honestly looked at them recently, what they're showing or how they're doing it, but the National Endowment for the Arts has a history of supporting or not supporting. Serrano, if you recall, did the Christ in the jar of piss. So, and that was totally a National Endowment for the Arts art project. How what's right, what's wrong? Do we support it? Does the public support it, or do we put limits on it? Only if it meets a certain standard.
Didn't some of this go on with NPR also, if I recall, and they, I don't remember if they would cut their funds, but they do have to do a lot more in donation than they used to, the percentage.
Yeah, because of the for
Right.
what they present on their show. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just such a tough call because you would hope that this funding, again, would open up the art world or the opportunities for more artists. That should be part of their goal, really. And in doing that, there's just going to be controversy. But
Mhm.
I think I am concerned about the protesters' desire to punish the artist space by writing to their funding agency to complain about the show and say that their funds maybe should be taken away. When again, this was supposed to be a space that was to create opportunities for a broad range of artists. It's a tough call.
Yeah, that's similar to the first article, where they wanted to destroy the artwork, actually destroy the artwork.
Yeah.
And I think the two pieces, if you remember the Emmett Till in the casket was a actual live, it wasn't a fantasy, it wasn't made up, it actually was an image. And in that case, it was who had the right to do it. Did a white person have the right to do it? In this case, it's a white person doing something totally unrelated to the and out of context from the title, and using that as a very provocative title, and then the gallery jumping on. In the end, though, I think they got a tremendous amount of publicity out of it, a tremendous amount. And is that what we do to get publicity these days? Of course, this was 1979. We're going to look at I think 1969 is next time. But, yeah.
Nancy, after 1979, did the Art Center have more? I would suspect that they would have had more shows that were supportive of Black artists.
I
And
think
hopefully today.
yes, I think they did. But historically, Black artists have been marginalized in the art community, whether it's in the high end or the low end. It's only recently that we're starting to recognize that the art world is starting to recognize Black artists from the past. And again, a lot of it was not understanding their content. It was not necessarily going in the same direction as that's alternative stuff that was happening. Faith Ringgold, who is extremely well known, just worked forever and ever, and is now only recently being recognized. Are you familiar with her work?
No.
Can you, Susan, are you there? Is she there? Because I have another slide.
I'm sorry. I was just listening to a voicemail. You want me to advance?
Yeah, advance. What's the next one? And then I want to show the alternative piece. Yeah, this is the New York racism protest slated over the title of the art show. This was New York Times in 1970. So it certainly garnished a lot of publicity. But can you show the next show? Put up the next show.
Okay.
It's called support material. Did I send that to you?
I do. Well,
or can I share my screen now?
Absolutely. Let me stop sharing mine. Thanks everybody for their patience.
Well, I have to figure out how to share mine, but I'll pull it up.
And I do have some supporting material that I got a few weeks ago. But I'm gonna just need to find it real quickly.
This is a slideshow that I just sent yesterday, and then I thought this morning.
Oh. This is something you sent yesterday?
Yeah.
Okay, I do not have that. I mean, I have the email that you just sent, which is just the PowerPoint, which is what I just showed.
I didn't send the second PowerPoint.
No. Okay,
that's fine. I will pull it up, and something happened on mine. Let me try, because I want to show you what Faith Ringgold is doing and was doing, which is actually quite lovely, and yet
And so there's two ways to do it, but let's just do the easiest since it's a small group. I think we can understand. You can share your whole desktop and then navigate your desktop and open the PowerPoint. Or you can open your PowerPoint first that you're going to share.
Oh, I see.
And then choose it. When you share screen, you'll choose that PowerPoint option.
Okay, so I'll share screen. And oh, my desktop won't open for some reason. Open system preferences. That was the problem. All right, it's for security. I might not be able to.
Okay, do you want to go ahead and email that kind of while you guys are proceeding, and then I'll pull that up and share it again and we can talk through it.
Yeah. Well,
I do want to mention one thing. There's an artist in Holland named Sandra Hansen, and she's done a triptych of the Till thing. It's kind of an altarpiece. It's in wood. It's quite large. And she's never been able to do anything with it because of the subject matter. So this is still an issue today. It's very, and it's not of him being disfigured, it's him as a young man, and it's kind of like an altarpiece, but because she's a white artist and it's a Black family. So that's still kind of a controversial subject right now. And I'll try and get pictures of it, so maybe I can show you next week what it looks like, but it's really lovely, but she can't even put it up for sale because people have said that it's just totally inappropriate because she's white and she shouldn't be painting Black historical things. So it's interesting how that controversy still continues.
who is she?
Didn't she have it at Art Prize?
She might have. Maybe you
Was it Fountain
probably,
Street Church?
pardon me?
She showed it at Fountain Street Church during
Right,
Art
that's
Prize.
probably what she did, yeah.
Yeah.
But she got a lot of kickback about it and about the subject matter and her being white, so. And she still has it at her house. She's, I think she's going to donate it to the museum up in at Fair State.
That's
yeah,
an incredible museum, if anybody has not seen it.
I haven't seen it. I'd like to. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's interesting that in all of this controversy that the protesters' point was that the art world has to acknowledge that it's part of the real world, and that these decisions that they're making do have broader implications morally and socially. And I think oftentimes, I mean, the curators are not as sensitive to that as they should be. But I think that's a really valid point, that they have to understand what the impact of some of this is going to be in the broader world and on certain communities. And, again, they can't just totally live in their separate world or their ivory tower, whatever you might want to call it.
Yeah, but I think at what point do you take a single action and accept it as a broader experience or broader statement? And that's maybe one of the issues. Faith Ringgold's work, Howard and Pindell, A. Pindell, first, if we go to the next slide on this one.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh.
Can I do it?
My computer's thinking. I'm asking it to do a lot right now, and thank you guys for your patience. The computer I have Zoom up and I'm controlling the whole meeting. And so I'm asking the computer to do a lot at the same time. I'm going to leave it in this format. You're going to be able to see all 4 slides, but just tell me where to go because I think that's safest.
Yeah, Faith Ringgold. Well, first of all, Howard and Pindell. She was also one of the protesters. She was not in the show, but this was her work, very alternative work, very meets all of the alternative sort of descriptions or guidelines. And it's titled Free, White, and 21 in 1980. She did this year after. Very, very much part of that. But she has not been a big name in the art world. But Faith Ringgold, the next one, Faith has been a tremendous leader in the Black art community. And this is what she did in 1979. This is a portrait of Alice Neal. I think it's absolutely lovely. It's beautifully done, beautiful colors, etc. But her body of work, the next one, really is, she really is a quilter, and she did a lot. This one's titled "Who's Afraid of Aunt Jemima?" And honestly, just recently, Aunt Jemima's name was dropped from as being used as brand name for the syrup. But I thought they had done that long time ago, actually, and I just read recently. But she's been Faith has been working in this direction for many, many years. She does a lot of quilts in that genre, but it's very naive in structure, in actual drawing technique. I don't think she's naive in her abilities. I think she did it intentionally, but that's very much where the Black community was going in terms of art during that time period. So it didn't fit in with like what Pindell did, the push the envelope sort of thing. So it brought in the face of the white man issues they didn't want to deal with, I think. And a lot of Black artists were doing that at that time and not wanting to do what everybody else was doing. So it's been a hard road for the Black community to make inroads, but Faith has and is highly regarded now in the Black art world. So those are some of the other supporting pieces that I pulled from some of the people.
Stop sharing.
Yeah, that's all that I have. Yeah. So, again, I'm sort of still stuck with should they. In the end, the gallery sort of issued I think a weak statement on it. But then there was Vito Escanzi, as I had noted earlier, had also flouted taboo art, taboo against using the N word in a piece in 1977 in the Whitney, and it was very bad. It was "Tonight We Escape from New York," featuring an audio track in which Escanzi can be heard to say, "I'm talking to you. How else could I talk to you? Down, down, we made you, nigger. You're a nigger, damn, higher, higher, you cunt." That's Vito. That was the lovely man that I had that conversation with. So, so he came opposing the protest. He came in support of Donald using the term, and so there are too many sides, I think, of the issue.
Nancy, I have a question, kind of
Yeah.
backing up a little bit when it got brought up about the responsibility of the art world
Yes.
regarding, I just wonder, are the students taught anything about their effect on others, whether it's sociology, psychology, or whatever?
Yeah,
And that expectation of the art world is to, if they're expected to do that, like I think it was Sarah that said they're in the bubble. I just wonder how what should be expected.
It oftentimes depends on the head of the department. Because I think back to my time, I went to a Catholic girls. It's now a major university in Milwaukee. It was a very small Catholic girls' school at the time, headed up by a nun, a lovely nun who couldn't cope with the work in the standard art world, but did beautiful art. That was her thing. I mean, very multicultural, did beautiful work. But the University of Wisconsin at that time was working very much in the alternative field. So what each one of those departments, coming back to today, art, in order to get a degree, you have to take philosophy, you have to take all the English literature courses. So yeah, so the students must be very worldly in their knowledge coming out. But having said that, they also come out with a very defensive, I think, position. It was, I had to defend that, and many times it was interesting because it depended upon what your major was. Graphic design people, in fact, we had made controversies with shows being hung from our board of directors, and our trustees were the Ford family, the General Motors, Fisher Body, all of the major money people, the cancer hospital, I can't think of the name of it, Carhartt. Those were the people that were our trustees. And if we offended them at a show, they let us know. And one time, I can remember when some student in the graphic design department did something that was, honestly, I didn't think it was that offensive, but a board member was offended by it. So we had to defend it for a whole year, and every department had to have conversations about it. Whether we should go there, what it said, what it meant. So those discussions are had, but I think our students come out defensive, to be honest with you.
But if the board represents the status quo and the
Exactly.
old white money,
Yes.
you're going to
Yeah.
get the same kind of response probably.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I also remember one time we had a giant painting that was right in the forefront when you walk through the major doors. I mean, there are 4 floors of art that we had, but the 11th floor was the major show, and the president of the school came walking in. He said, "It's got to go. Can't be there. The board won't like it." And they did not move it. The fine arts department stood their ground, and basically it said the F word, so in very large type. But they stood their ground. So it's always a controversy somehow, it seems. So I'm sorry I interrupted someone. What were you going to say? Anybody? Oh, you're on mute.
No, I just wanted to say I've been remembering when we voted for Carter in this 1979.
Yes.
And it was a very uneven, controversial time, exceptionally so for me personally and my husband. So I'm just trying to personalize that era.
Yes.
And I vote too for myself.
That's why I said it's hard to look at it through the lens of 2021 and all that happened, and particularly while I read it, and why I was so opposed to doing this myself is that I didn't feel I walked the walk or talked the journey, had the journey, and so I didn't feel I was the right person to do it, particularly last summer, where many of my friends at CCS did and wrote eloquently about their experiences during the time. I wish I had one of the poems that one of my friends wrote. It was just stunning. But it's a time, and these are people that I worked with every single day and looked at as my peers, friends, neighbors, and never conversations never came up ever, between us. Just family talk, art world talk. And suddenly last summer it all exploded on us in right downtown Detroit, where the school is located and where many of my friends lived. And it really, really exploded in a way like, oh my word, how naive could I have been to not take a second thought. I knew obviously what many of the support people on campus were living through, but not, I went home at night and didn't have a second thought. So this was particularly difficult to read this summer, I think. Time has a way of healing, and not healing, but forgetting, maybe it's forgetting. Yeah.
Nancy, I have a question, a general question.
Mhm.
The idea of provoking or offending people,
Yes,
going back with your original letter to email to us about Deschamps' urinal being
yes, yes.
In a or trying to get it in an exhibit as a fountain.
Mhm.
In art history, when there's been a drastic change, I'm thinking possibly with the Impressionists, when there was a drastic change in the in painting in particular,
Mhm.
you had the old school saying, "Oh, that's not really art," or they're, they are not to be included in this exhibit or whatever because this is not traditional art. The Impressionists or whoever the new group was, were they ever really trying to provoke and offend people? I look at it more as, well, they just developed a different view of light or whatever, or subject matter. But it seems like in the 20th century, we've gotten into this thing of, let's do something that's really offensive.
And that was the point. That was Duchamp. That's what he did. You know, his traditional work. He did Nude Descending the Staircase. Are you familiar with that? Beautiful, absolutely lovely. Not that controversial. I suppose it was to a degree, but nothing like the urinal. And when he did that urinal and that exploded, that literally changed the meaning of art, and art. It literally changed the aesthetic or the philosophy of why we make art. So it was profound, and then it started the ready-mades, which people were then. It sort of gave license to people to not have to literally construct the object, but use something that has already been constructed. So it truly did. He did it intentionally, push the envelope. Did the Impressionists? I don't think they. I can't remember thinking that they consciously did. I know they were trying to do work that they felt was equally as well done or on a level with the traditional artwork. But I don't think they thought about maybe Moreau, or who did, I don't know if you're familiar with Moreau. He did really fun loving sort of things. Alexander Calder did similar. I think Calder just did it to be playful and wound up being successful in the end. But I don't think they did it in a way that was offensive. And I think what Duchamp did, he knew he was offending. And I think that made the difference.
And are we thinking, going back to the beginning of our discussion, did Donald know that he was being as offensive as he was? Or, as you said, was he so naive that he could just make the statement, oh, well, language doesn't, the word doesn't matter anymore? Because I looked at it at first, well, he was just really trying to make trouble and be offensive.
Well, if you recall, I asked the question, was he justified? And I think he felt he was justifying his choice by coming up with that. I think personally, I think he did it to be provocative. I think, I don't know whether it's said in this article or another article I read about him, but he came out from California, I think it was California, and was immediately taken under the wing by one of the curators from Artist Space, and wasn't necessarily any better than anything else that was happening at the time. So I think his choice was to be was to bring attention to his work, because his work itself was lovely, but not controversial, not uniquely different, or maybe size-wise and working in charcoal like that might have been. But I think he just was trying to draw attention to his
Isn't
work.
that saying there isn't such a thing as bad publicity? Kind of fits in.
Yeah, I think so. I think in the end, he wound up generating a lot of publicity, but after 3 years, wound up going back. He didn't even make it in the art scene, but he certainly did cause a lot of controversy at the time. So, yeah. Yeah, but I think that's an excellent question in terms of was art made to be offensive? But yeah, I hesitated looking at because I wrote vehemently against Vito's work and a number of other artists, and I still have those essays that I wrote when I was an undergrad work about some of the things he was doing on the gallery scene. And and I knew that I was coming from a world of beautiful, but and I knew that art wasn't always beautiful. I certainly was aware of all of that, but I thought Vito's work was pushing the envelope in what he did. But this young man was pushing the envelope in how he presented it or what he titled it. And I'm not convinced that it was justified in what he did.
I get almost, I mean, he was a young man, naive, ignorant, whatever, but the gallery should have known better. That's what I'm more surprised at than some kid.
Right, but as I said, he came out. He was recommended by one of the professors in his at his school, and he was taken under the wing by one of the curators at the gallery. So it was almost like blind love. Well, okay, we'll show you because so and so likes you, and so I want to do you a favor. And I think he was quirky at the time. Also, he went on to be to do one or two other shows, but then he nosedived. Nobody wanted anything to do with him anymore. So
Maybe that's why they picked the title then, because of the relationship with this one artist.
Well, I think Susan, I'm glad you said that, because I think that's got to be it, because there is no other possible justification for calling the show what they did, given the 4 artists that they had. The other ones, well, Patricia Hearst at that time, she was equally as controversial. If you recall, she was kidnapped and brainwashed and then came out of it. And, was the public believing that? I mean, that was a really interesting topic, I think, at the time. And I think would have been far more interesting as the title of the show from one of his pieces than what they ultimately titled it. Yeah.
Do you think some of that shift in the art world is a reflection of a continuation of the 60s, the rebelliousness?
Absolutely.
All of that. Yeah.
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 No, it came out then. Yeah. One of my professors at the same school that for undergrad was studying at the University of Michigan, or I keep getting my states confused, University of Wisconsin at the time. By the way, I went on to teach there shortly after that, and my husband took my course, and that's how I wound up in Michigan at Herman Miller's. But her work literally was cement canvases that she drove her Volkswagen through, and that was her art. So, how do you explain that? She went on to be a librarian for a law library. So, I don't know. It seems like when people try to get out there, it doesn't work. When they intuitively and naturally do something, and it strikes a nerve. It seems to hold up and work much better if they're truly justified in what they're doing. Just an observation.
It's interesting that what we've been working on for this course. Right now, my husband's listening to the final arguments in the Chauvin trial.
Oh,
I mean, the timeliness of what you've, this was put together quite a long time ago, but
yeah, and here we are
here we
culminating
are. Yeah.
discussion. Yeah, I have to say I haven't with the baby, and I won't hear it all week. So I can't think if it's a blessing or or whatever, but I won't know what's going on from day to day. Because I don't know if all of you know, I'm here down in Florida taking care of my 2-month-old granddaughter, because my daughter-in-law has to go back to work now, so just for the week. So I'm completely dedicated to the baby, other than this time period. And I told them right off the bat I had to do this, and they said, "All right, we'll cover you, Mom." So come down.
2 months old and you're still standing up and awake, huh?
Yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm. Working on trying to get her on a schedule, but hoping she'll be an artist. But my 5-year-old granddaughter has declared she is going to be an artist because Nana is. So she. So it'll be interesting to see where her world goes.
I was at the Kreisinga this morning, and the display, the lecture and everything was truly, well, I forgot the term you used, when you produce something, create something from the heart that you really believe, or if you're mocking, or if you're playing games. Anyway, it's quite an experience to go, and it is more open to all of us right now.
The gallery is open.
Yeah, well, it was kept to the students for a while, but now they're welcoming the public. And they have 4 dollies that were given to Hope College that are exceptional. And if you read the whole script, and it started with printmaking, and it's a very good show.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, and again, he was a man that was sort of driven to do what he did over the years. He didn't change. Many artists just, but on the contrary, Alexander Calder he did what he felt he had to do, and it was fun and lively, and he wasn't always well received, but his work also has the staying power. But I think it's driven, it's intuitive, it's from the heart, and I think it makes a difference in terms of the.
But going back maybe to my question about offending, I can understand many people objecting to a Dali or maybe a Magritte, but who would be offended by melting clocks? You know, it's, you look at it, many people would look at it and say, you know, what is this? This is ridiculous, but it's not offensive the way what we're talking about now.
It's not offensive in a hurtful way.
Yes.
It's the hurtfulness. I mean,
Yes.
I can see Sister Thomasita, the head of my department, who I love dearly. She passed away in her 90s, but she could have been offended by it. But even that, she was a staunch defender of people doing what they felt they needed to do. But it needed to be a visual image that didn't hurt someone. So yeah.
I'm a interloper in the sense that I'm not taking the class, but I have been sitting here fascinated during the bit of time I have been. May I comment?
Oh, please do. Yes.
There was an article in the New York Times that speaks to the point that you were talking about a little earlier, and has been a thread in almost everybody's comments. It is, the article was in the Sunday Times, and about the work that Van Gogh's sister-in-law did to bring him
I didn't read it.
to,
Yeah.
did you read it?
No, I did not. I haven't read
Oh,
it.
okay. Well,
Someone sent it to me. Yeah.
it was very much to the point that you were talking about in terms of offensiveness for one thing, and the distinction between what the Impressionists were trying to do. The Impressionists exhibition, when they were rejected from the French Academy,
Yes, yes.
was called L'exhibition des Refusés. And I'll bet I don't need to translate that to anybody. Refusés is kind of obvious. But they call themselves les fauves, the wild ones.
Yes, the Fauvists.
Yes, and they were indeed offensive in the sense that became much clearer to me from one line in that article, which was the transition between the classical painting with its emphasis on line and logic, story,
Yes.
compared with first the Impressionists, and then particularly with Van Gogh, whose emphasis was on exposing his life, in effect, on emotion, on trying to, and this people did find clearly historically offensive. I mean, the exhibit of the people who were refused is clearly a cry from people who are trying to change things and trying to make people see, and of necessity upset people.
Yeah.
Well, I think that trying to make people to see that you're talking about in terms of not being nasty, so to speak, or speaking from the heart, is very much the balancing act that isn't done by people who are interested only in, forgive more French, épater le bourgeois from the same period.
Yeah.
And that going back to your remark about the 60s, trying to shock the middle class.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, which has always been a theme in modern art once they started talking about themselves. And that was what was so clear in this article, and I would recommend it to everybody who's interested at all in art, because it was indeed about a seismic shift in how artists viewed themselves and their work. From the middle class Rembrandt with his atelier, his studio and his apprentices, and to somebody like Van Gogh, who went crazy and starved himself, among other things. And now I'll shut up. I apologize.
Yeah.
No, I think I haven't read the article, but the Fauvists, Fauvism means color. So they
Wild. It means the
wild color, yes. So they were using orange for the sky, or blue for the trees or something. So they were interpreting the scene as in the way they wanted to present it, not as it was. And photography had a lot to do with that, because we could now photograph and see a traditional landscape rather than paint it. So they were trying to take off from that movement as well. But you're absolutely correct. It was offensive to the traditional painters and the traditional art that was going on at the time. And they did cause another change in the way we viewed art, accepted art, and how the philosophy of art, why we make art. When we talk about aesthetics is not only the line, the shape, the color, but it's also why I made it. Is it pragmatic? Do I want to convince you of something? Or is it impressionistic? Do I want you to see something in a different way? So there's different philosophies or aesthetics as to why. And that was the beginning of that movement.
I just read this article at lunch today, and it's in the magazine section of the Sunday Times, New York Times. So if you want to read it, it's just excellent.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is available online, right?
Yeah.
I'm mindful of the time here. It is a little past 2:30, so thanks for a good discussion today. If you have any further questions of Nancy or anyone else, you're welcome to stay on, but I know if people have other commitments, it is fine to depart at this point. We do have one more act in the Whitewalling book to
Right.
talk about next Monday.
I
So
think it
we'll
was
see you back here.
a very interesting and relatable story as well, I think.
Thank you
Yeah.
so much.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Nancy.
Thank you, Nancy.
Okay.
Enjoy that
you.
baby.
Great discussion.
Yeah. Thanks. We'll meet again next week.
We'll see you next week.
Yeah, I'll be home. No baby.
Yeah. And I actually have my coat on because I'm going to depart. I have another commitment, but I would say that that the PowerPoints were excellent, and I think it really encouraged that discussion. I mean, it was very hard for me to not unmute and start talking. I wish I was part of this class. Anyway, I bid you all farewell. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay. Bye-bye. And then no other questions, I presume. Thank you. Bye-bye.